and welcome to the special webinar that's entitled The Age of Innovation, that is presented by our awesome guest speaker, Professor Barry Cross. And before introducing Barry as our main event speaker, just a couple of other introductions and thoughts. My name is Peter Gallant. I'm director of the Queen's Master of Management, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship program here in the Smith School of Business at Queen's University at the beautiful Kingston, Ontario campus. I'm also joined by Marianne Young, who is our Associate Director of the MMIE program. And Marianne will be one of the first people you meet if you decide that that these topics around innovation and entrepreneurship are interesting enough to you that perhaps you want to consider joining one of our professional and graduate programs, including our Masters of Management, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship. MMIE, as we call it, is one of 12 graduate professional programs that are offered at Smith. You can choose to study everything from entrepreneurship and innovation through digital product management, through a Master's of Management in Artificial Intelligence, Management Analytics, Financial Innovation and Technology, as well as a number of our award-winning, internationally and nationally ranked MBA programs as well. The webinar you're about to participate in gives you a small taste of the types of learning opportunities that you would engage in our professional programs, including MMIE, where Professor Barry Cross, who I'm about to introduce, is one of our frequent lecturers. So this is the type of experience that you would do in a professional and graduate program. And that desire to innovate, either as an entrepreneur, a corporate innovator, or an intrapreneur, an entrepreneur within a corporation, or even if you're innovating in your own career by doing a career pivot, these are some of the primary reasons that our students consider undertaking that 12-month journey in the MMIE program. And if you're interested in that, we'll discuss more about the program and how to apply for it at the end of the session. But now on to the main event. And I'm pleased to introduce Professor Barry Cross. He is also our Assistant Dean of the Professional and Graduate Program Suite here at the Smith School of Business. Barry is an expert and thought leader in innovation, execution, and supply chain and operations strategy. He joined Smith in 2006 after nearly 20 years in the automotive and manufacturing sectors with such huge company leaders as Magna, Auto Systems, and DuPont, where he led many strategic initiatives, including nearly 30 program launches in North America, Asia, Latin America, and Europe. He's also the author of 3 books on project leadership and lean innovation. Many of the faculty that are teaching in our professional and graduate programs who are practitioners who deliver real-world experience combined with theory, and Barry is equally comfortable in each realm where he leads courses in operations, lean innovation, and strategy. The topic that Barry's going to explore with us today is focused on the challenges of developing innovation strategy. Why innovation? Why now? And what does it look like? And before I turn it over to Barry, just one quick aside, and that is, if you do have questions or thoughts or comments throughout Barry's presentation, we will have a Q&A opportunity at the end of the webinar. Please put those questions and thoughts into the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, and our Associate Director, Marianne Young, will moderate those questions and will be looking at those at the end of the session. So Barry, without any further ado, over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you especially to everybody who's joined us here afternoon time here in Eastern Ontario. But as I looked at the registrant list, we've literally got people from around the world, and a really good reflection, honestly, of how even education has changed, especially over recent years. I'm currently residing down in the depths of Goods Hall here on the Queen's campus in one of our state-of-the-art studios. That my friend Peter was across the country in Halifax. And as I said, we've got many of you in different time zones in different parts of the world as we join us. So thank you again. And once again, if there are any questions, happy to look at those towards the end of the presentation when we get to that Q&A function. Just drop those in the chat, and our wonderful host here, Marianne, will coordinate that for us a little bit later. So we want to talk, as Peter said, a little bit more about innovation, and more specifically, why innovation? Why does it matter right now? And, for our organizations, whether it's me as an individual and I'm interested in doing stuff like this, or we as an organization, and why is this necessary now? There is a broader focus really on some of the, some pretty significant elements of change that are going on within society-wide elements of disruption or disintermediation or other things like that are really just kind of making us pause and think, if not radically change the way that we work. Right. So that's really my plan here, is to talk about, again, why innovation, why now, but then what do we do about it? And there's multiple forms of innovation, going back to a story here that is likely familiar to a few people in the room at least. And this is almost a little bit amusing right now, where we look at this and say, was Apple really a threat to BlackBerry? That seems like an odd question now in today's world. But if you go back in time a little bit, and I brought my last BlackBerry that I had back in like 2010 or something like that, and you look at this thing, and yeah, people who had these devices, this is something that we were actually pretty enthusiastic about at the time. We had tactile keyboards, we had high security, nice little device, fit in the shirt pocket. And people who had BlackBerries acknowledged that it was the security, it was that keyboard. And in fact, that market was growing for BlackBerry at the time. So it seems pretty presumptuous for that question to be asked. And we're going back obviously 14 years, almost to the day at this point, when people were having that kind of a discussion. But then you start to think about that behavior. And Apple and those Android devices at the time, that was more of an experiential device. There were browsers, there were apps, there were, people taking pictures all the time now. And that was a very different type of user experience. Now, fast forward a few years, and that threat became a major transition within the industry, and large levels of behavior changed. And we as an organization, if you can think back then as well, a lot of the people who were carrying BlackBerries as their workplace device also had in their other pocket or on their other hip that first iPhone. And if I'm not paying attention to anything else, if I'm BlackBerry at the time, recognizing that people are now carrying two devices, right? That's a potential, that's got to be a pretty significant threat. Now, if you've got a direct competitor threat like that, that's one thing. More broadly for us in this case, we've got a number of other environmentally significant events and disruptions that are happening. We can talk about the inflation that's been occurring over the last few years, talent changes and shortfalls, and really just the behavior of people, where we're looking for a little more flexibility, a little more of that work from home type environment, and then some of the other environmental challenges as well. So I can have a specific environmental threat like some of these, or a competitor threat. The bottom line is that for most of us, our organizational behavior is changing and shifting out there, right? That's something that we've got to pay attention to. Now, for some of you, you're looking at that and say, yeah, I'm aware of some of these environmental challenges, but if we're honest about it, our organization is doing quite nicely, thank you. And as an example, we can talk about a few of those kind of 5-star resorts and hotels out there. You might think about the Four Seasons brand. You can think about Sandals down in the Caribbean. These are places that many of you have been. And the nice thing about an operation like that is it continues to surprise and delight their customers. So if we're to drop a bit of that behavior on one of the frameworks that I apply here, we can call this a customer value map. And here's our customer expectations in most of these, in that type of an operation. And we can talk about the design and decor, the service range, the timeliness, the quality of the food and the catering and the overall service. And yeah, we're expecting something pretty nice. But for these enterprises, you can look at those particular brands and say, yeah, they do a really good job of actually exceeding some of those customer expectations. And that's why they can charge a premium. That's why people come back and get very excited about it. All right, so why do these companies need to continue to innovate? Well, here's the challenge. Our customers become trained and they get used to that particular element of service, surprise, and delight. And after you've been to that particular establishment a few times, it's kind of, right, which seems very unfair. Right, but our customers get trained in what to expect. Their level of expectations are up here now as opposed to where they started, and it gets to be more difficult for them to be delighted. And therefore, these organizations that I referred to, the Four Seasons brand, hotels like them, Sandals down in the Caribbean, again, as an example, they do a very good job of continuing to innovate, recognizing that dynamic with their customers. So ultimately, this applies to basically all of us. And as Peter alluded to a few minutes ago, this is why we, as I said, innovative, those individuals who are wired to do more in this space, maybe considering a program like this, or are those, creative types within your existing organizations? Or more likely, leadership. And we've got a lot of kind of both cohorts in this room, where we've got those leaders and executives that, regardless of the type of enterprise that you lead, are accountable for developing and creating what's next within our enterprise. So that's part of what we have to look at here and say, whatever that vision is, whether innovation is helping support that vision, or it's actually partially responsible for creating and enabling that vision, we have a need and a requirement to continually react and adapt to the elements that are going on around us. That's us, that's all of us. So that's one of those things where, if things are going a little bit too well for too long, people kind of pull back a little bit. They tend to ride on some of that previous success, right? Not us. We got to be better than that. So what is innovation? What does it really look like? And typically, it's this product-based stuff. We can go back to the tech days with BlackBerry. We can talk about stuff like this. This is generally what people think about when they think about innovation, right? And creativity, right? And they're right. It's those products that are interesting, that get our attention on store shelves and, on the street when we're walking by, that vehicle feature, whatever we're seeing. Interesting. The challenge with this, with product-based innovation, is that it's expensive, it's time consuming, and there's a long ramp up. And again, if we're honest about it, that's maybe 20% of society out there that's engaged in some of this product-based work. For most of us around our room here today, and more broadly across society, our opportunities truly reside in what we'll call service innovation and process innovation. Now, there are, as I said, there's all kinds of innovation out there. We can talk about differences in distinguishing between, say, entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship. We can talk about product versus process, startups versus innovating inside of existing organizations. It's the latter where I'm going to focus in this kind of half hour that we've got together here. All right, so over here on the right side of this chart, if I'm to look at process-based innovation and service-based innovation, this is where we have perhaps the broadest opportunity across society. And that's generally where I focus with the organizations that I work with now. All right, so it all typically starts with some form of a problem. And we've all got these problems. If we can think about those specific competitor threats, like I referred to a moment ago, broader based environmental challenges, or sometimes it's more specific like this. And most of you will be familiar with one of these challenges that many enterprises face during the pandemic. Grocery stores, retailers, hospitality organizations like my slide here, where there is an artificial barrier placed on us in that, because of the conditions of the pandemic, you are now limited to 50% of your normal capacity, which means you can only have half as many customers in the room at any one time. Now, the innovators in the room, the creative types, will look at this and say, you know what, right? I understand that, I respect it, but I refuse to assume that limiting myself to 50% of my capacity limits me also to 50% revenue, 50% profitability. Therefore, this is a problem I'm going to solve. I'm going to find a way to acknowledge and accept that capacity restraint, yet not have it limit my business. Right? These are the types of things that get me excited. When I see a problem like that, then I see a couple of people saying, yeah, I can fix that. I can solve that problem. And that's a lot of you in this room, right? And that's why you're, involved in even just a brief webinar like this, is because this is the type of stuff that gets you geeked up about solving some of those potential problems that are out there that are kind of holding either an organization, a particular team, or even more broadly society back a little bit, right? So you take that particular challenge and problem. As I said, we're not talking about entrepreneurship, the startups at the bottom of these product life cycles. We're more focused up here somewhere. These are the existing organizations. And if I put them on this product or service life cycle, or what I refer to more broadly as a business model life cycle, these problems become these change events. And it's how we react to these change events that give us the ability to continue to create value. The challenge being that if we don't find some way to react and adjust and then innovate and create to solve that particular problem or opportunity that's there in front of us, we end up stalling. The business model that we're on right now will come to an end. This is a law. It's a law like gravity. And the fact that every one of these business models at some point is going to, run out of speed. Now, I don't want this to feel like doom and gloom, because quite honestly, what happens is after the end of one of our existing business model life cycles, there's another one right behind it. And this is the part of this whole behavior, this mindset, this application of particular tools that excites me as well, because what these organizations are doing is finding a way to transition, to transform from what they are doing right now into this next business model life cycle. That's the application of entrepreneurship, of innovating within existing organizations. That's the type of stuff that should feel like an opportunity for you as well, despite the stress that we feel right here associated with, kind of flatlining revenues. Perhaps we've even lost a few customers, or, we're starting to see the impact of these higher interest rates or whatever's going on. This is the type of stuff when we start to apply some of the creative power within your organization that we start to say, okay, you know what, maybe it's time for us to transition and look at what's next. That's really what we're about here. The organizations that find a way to do this on an ongoing basis, it's not so much as kind of preserving their existing lifestyle. They look at this and say, this is going to enable me to continue to grow and develop my enterprise. Now, this applies virtually across society. We can think about those private sector operations. We can think about retail. We can think about manufacturing, but it also applies to healthcare. And there's an example I'll share with you in a few minutes. It applies to education. It applies to the public sector within government, right? Everywhere. These are the things that help us start to drive whatever's next and innovate effectively within our organization. And if we're paying attention as leadership and those innovators around the organization, we appreciate and acknowledge those environmental changes. And those are the types of elements that start to get us to think a little bit differently about, again, the way that we work. But you've got access to all kinds of ideas. You can look at those customer behavioral changes that we started with today. You can think about that new vision and direction, that strategy, focusing top down within an organization, and how are we going to deliver that value? And even a lot of the data and analytics that are out there right now, your customers, your employees are telling you something, and it's up to us to find a way to listen. All right, now, having said that, one of the things that I like to say, everything works in PowerPoint, right? Just because I say it doesn't make it easy. There's a number of elements out there that are actively resisting that change. And sometimes it's based on past behavior. And I've got a couple of challenges I want to highlight for us really briefly. And this is the type of stuff we find a way to get over. But most of our organizations, you've got processes. You've got the way that you do work right now, the way that you create value for customers or internal customers, whatever that looks like. The problem is that those processes are somewhat dysfunctional. And there's a lack of ownership for those processes. Let me kind of walk you through this brief example here. Right, here's a kind of a 3-station process. Station 1, 2, and 3. And I've got cycle times on the screen here for each one of these steps. And let's assume that with this process, you've got a lineup of customers. You've got a lot of people that want to get through this particular process. I want you to think for a minute, have a look at that process and think, how many customers can we serve in 1 hour? Right? How long does it take one customer to get through that process? So the first one, how long does it take that customer to get through the process? You're going to do the math, you add that up, and it comes out to 60 seconds. And you look at that naturally, and if I say, okay, how many customers are we going to serve per hour? The natural first response is 60 because of that 60-second cycle time, but that's not the answer, right? We can really fit 120 people through that particular process in an hour, assuming, again, that lineup of customers coming in. Now, where does that come from? Right here. That's our bottleneck. And that bottleneck determines the cadence. It determines the graduation rate, so to speak, of your customers getting out of that process. And when we've got some of these dysfunctional processes around our organization, I can promise you that one of the challenges we've got is that there's not a lot of people around the business that truly understand how to optimize some of these processes. All right, so that's challenge number 1. Here's challenge number 2. This is what I call drive-by design. And that's where we assume that our design expertise is more important than our domain ignorance. So somewhere up the line from this house actually being built, there is a designer crafting floor layouts and floor plans and square footage and everything else. And then when the builders go to build this house, they say, okay, it's got the 2-car garage. We're really excited about that. But when you look at the right side of this image, we've got a real problem. They've got that door, 15 inches above the floor. So I've got to have this big set of steps right there. This 2-car garage is now a 1-car garage. And if I'm lucky, I've got room for a nice tool bench in the back of it. Right? That's a problem. Here's another one. I was out giving a keynote address in Calgary last fall. And, I check into my hotel, wanted to get a little bit of work done before I go over and give the talk. And I check in and there's the chair. For my desk in that room. And it's a wonderful looking chair, nice fabric on it. And in fact, when I look at that chair, it looks like something I might sit in if I was penning a note to the Prime Minister, right? Dear Honorable. The problem with that chair is that when I sat in it, the desk was way up here. It was completely dysfunctional. I called down to the front desk. I said, hey, I need a regular desk chair here. And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, it's too short, right? They didn't have any way to help me. Interestingly, a couple of months later, I got an email from the general manager of the hotel, and they said they'd replaced all the chairs in the rooms. But this is a case of a designer looking at layout and fabrics and colors and everything else and appointing that room in a certain fashion without any consideration at all for the people that are actually, working or doing something functional inside of these rooms, right? Forgot all about that idea of a user experience. So these are the natural barriers that get in the way of us being more functional as an organization. So when I start to apply some of our creative models that we use to drive and support innovation inside of existing organizations, I want to have a really good idea. Who's my customer? Who is that customer? What do they want? Why did they walk in our door today? And the moment I start to think about that and think about the employees who are engaged in the experience and start to reduce some of their frustration, these are the things that start to enable an appropriate process and engagement towards creating sustainable value. All right, so I start with the customers. And then I start to think about somebody having to own that process so that we can start to improve and define that process. And again, if we're honest about it, many of the processes around our organization, if we have a process that's defined, are probably 14, 15 years old and designed by somebody who's no longer with us. Right? Once we map the process, we can highlight some of those challenges and say, you know what, right there is our key opportunity. And if I focus there, I'm going to be able to find a way to create more value on behalf of our customers. But unless I map it out like this, if I can't visualize the process, I can't fix it. I can't make it any better. Okay. And then finally, if we can't, doing all of this, one of the most valuable elements that we've got sometimes is a fresh pair of eyes. For some of you, that's you. If you're new to an organization or you're, engaging in some type of upskilling, whatever that is, you become that fresh pair of eyes. For others, I want to find a way to, borrow somebody from another enterprise, maybe somebody from within my network or, another department or division within the company, have them come over and have a look at my problem. I know there's something going on there, right? But I need some help seeing it. These are just, sometimes simple little goofy things. In other cases, more procedural. But all of this type of stuff allows us to start thinking more specifically about some of those problems and challenges that we've got. And then, hey, what do we do about them, right? So here we are. Here's that example I wanted to share with you from earlier. And I want to move into healthcare. And I want to point out before I go too far with this, this is certainly not about practitioners within that space. These are some of the smartest and hardworking people within society. And yet we've got a pretty significant capacity problem right now. It's not to do with the individuals, it's to do with kind of the structure and the way that we work within that particular space. The other reason I want to focus here is because it's a pretty massive opportunity. And when you look at the demographics here, especially, the population, and we're focusing specifically here within the next few minutes on the geriatric, call it the boomers and senior population. We'll say people 1 year older than Barry and older. And that population, because people are living longer, they're healthier lifestyles, everything else, but that population is really expected to grow over the next 10 to 20 years. Now that's great on one hand, But the flip side is, from a capacity standpoint within the healthcare system, this gets to be a pretty significant challenge that we need to find a way to sort this out. You know, these people, when they get into the healthcare system, prolonged bed rest promotes dysfunction. They came in with, say, a hip problem, and while they're there lingering and recovering from hip surgery, they catch pneumonia or another infection that's, you know, in that particular ward of the hospital. So these hospitals are, you know, by people in the hospital, are referred to as hostile environments. A guy like Erie Chapman down at large healthcare corporation in the US refers to his work as a hostile environment, right? So how do we get better? Now, there's a really smart guy up in Toronto. His name's Dr. Samir Sina. He works for Mount Sinai, and he's the head of geriatrics inside of that hospital. And he had some interesting ideas, and he's making a presentation to the board of directors, asking for a bit of funding to run a trial. And Dr. Sina says, you know what? We're going to start with a question. Are we a hospital or a hotel? And the board members, all very serious people, kind of, you know, they're frowning. Well, Dr. Sina, what do you mean by that? And he says, well, I'll tell you what, we don't eat meals in bed at home. Why are we serving 3 meals a day in bed to our patients? And that's really just the way that we've always done things. So here's his plan. He asked for $40,000 in funding. The board gave it to him. And what he did was run what he calls his acute care for elderly strategy, focusing on enhancing the rest and socialization, movement, early ambulation of the patients inside of that particular ward. Instead of having surgical patients, heart patients, oncology patients, you know, after a particular treatment salted around the organization, around the hospital, he's going to bring them together into one larger geriatric ward. And in that ward, we're going to focus on, as I said, early ambulation. So one of the key problems we've got for this population inside of our hospitals, you know, is a couple of things. The first one of the leading causes of falls for this patient body within these hospitals is getting in and out of bed. Most of the beds are up at this kind of height. Who is that for? Well, it's certainly not for the patients. That's for the practitioners. You know, if I'm checking blood pressure, having a conversation with the patients, administering medication, you know, that's really on their behalf. So what they're doing is, outside of that consult with the practitioner, the beds are kept at normal kind of household height. Therefore, when I'm getting in and out of bed, I just swing over, put my feet flat on the floor, and I stand up. Another challenge we've got is patients tripping when they're putting on their own slippers after they get out of bed, right? So what we're going to do is take away the slippers. We're going to issue non-slip socks to all the patients. The most significant element of this is we're going to put a little dining area down at the end of our hallway. No more meals in bed. 3 times a day, at least, you're going to get up. You're going to shuffle down the hallway. We've got mobility devices. We've got people that can help you with that. Or if you're at the stage where you can just walk and hang onto the rail and take your time doing it, so be it. 3 times a day, food is down the hall. Now these people are sitting at tables with people like themselves. They're socializing, showing pictures. Here's my granddaughter. She's doing her MBA at Queen's. We're very proud of her. That type of stuff that seniors and boomers do, right? And they feel better about this. They're meeting people, they're socializing, they're moving up and down the halls, right? The outcome of this, right? This is massive. What we found in that experiment, Dr. Sina's experiment, is that patients recovered and were discharged more quickly. The cost of care per patient went down by 23%. They saved $6 million the first year they tried this. At the same time, they're increasing the capacity of that particular ward. Not bad. This is now being trialed at 14 other hospitals around Canada. But ultimately, this is what we call process innovation. It's service innovation. It's lowering cost. It's increasing capacity. And it's in one of the most difficult sectors in society to drive change in. And for no other reason that, you know, we've got a lot of these practices that this is always kind of the way that we've done things, right? So I find this kind of thing fascinating. And it's really just a highlight of, you know, an intent to highlight some of the real opportunities that we've got literally in any one of our organizations. If we can implement this in education, if we can implement it in healthcare, we can certainly do it within your organizations. Okay. So what we're looking for here is recognition that, you know, society is a little different today. and it's a lot less stable than it has been in the past. And that's, for a lot of these, environmental challenges I referred to, but also, for some good reasons as well. But, people are focusing more time and attention on things that matter more to them now. We've got a new sense of priority, and a lot of those priorities have shifted over the last few years. It's important to appreciate that this is going on, and for a lot of good reasons, as well, as I mentioned just a minute ago. It's really up to us to acknowledge that as an organization and say, okay, given that, how are we prepared to react? How will we respond to some of those environmental and behavioral challenges? What does that mean to us? So what I'd like you to do is to just think about and make some notes on, perhaps, and maybe this is something you can consider over the next couple of days. What are some of the most significant challenges that are being faced by your enterprise? What's going on in the world that's going to have an effect on the way that you work, the way that you engage with clients, with employees, with some of your external stakeholders? What's holding you back? What's keeping you awake at night? These are the types of things we can solve. There's people in the room like you that, this is the type of thing that they find very motivating. When I start to think about some of those macro level challenges, this is the type of stuff we fix, as opposed to just accept. And by fixing, it's not always us changing that behavior or that impulse within society. It's really us finding a way to capitalize on it. What does this mean for us? And this is what leads to that innovative spirit within some of our organizations. Some of you will also express that, I see the necessity for this individually, but if we're honest about it, Barry, we struggle sometimes to build any momentum, sometimes to even get leadership on board with the need for innovation within my enterprise. So what I've got here are a few what I call starting questions, or thought starters, or tough questions that, again, the type of thing that I would ask leadership if I was in the room with them. And sometimes this is a bit of a wake-up call, but if you think about some of those enterprises that are out there, how are we different from some of the other firms in our industry right now? Are we truly best at anything? And once again, this applies not just to the private sector, but it applies in education. It applies in healthcare. It applies in government. And if you take that large metropolitan city with, say, 4 or 5 or 6 different hospitals around the city, in an ideal world, this hospital here is going to be the best in the area at oncology. The one, 5 miles away is likely going to be, or we would like to see them being best at, say, pediatrics. Another one here being best at surgical services, as opposed to them all trying to, engage in a lot of the same, general hospital type practices, right? We need to be best at something. It applies to banks, telecoms, retail, everything. It applies in the public sector as well. In government, and budgets change, priorities change within government. That's part of the prerogative of those elected officials. But think about that. We as an agency, we compete for some of that funding. And if we are going to be successful in renewing our funding and our commitment from government, we better be damn good at what we do. Right? So how do we make that better? How do we improve the way that we work within government, within education? Given a choice, think about that hospital or clinic, or perhaps even schools. Do patients choose to come to our hospital, or are they driving a little bit further to get to one with a faster emergency department or a particular skill set? Do students come to our school because of proximity, or because we truly deliver an exceptional educational experience? And finally, and this is interesting because it's more and more the case where municipalities have to actually compete for residents. And in this world now, because it's been enabled by technology for people to basically work from wherever, if we want our population to grow and continue to be able to provide those services that we do, we better be doing something pretty special as a municipality as well. You've all seen some of those rankings. Victoria, the city of Victoria in Canada is generally within the top 2 or 3 of best places to live in Canada. And it's because they do some things pretty well. And it's also, quite honestly, about the weather. So there's some other things that, the things that we can control, that we can do, that create that great place to live experience. That's something that we have a responsibility to do as a municipal leadership. All right, finally, You know, we could talk about Canada being a great place to live. That is illustrated in a number of international surveys. But if we're honest about it, Canada's got a productivity problem. And if I'm thinking about myself, what keeps me awake at night when it comes to larger macro level challenges, this is the big one for me. Canada's got a productivity problem. This is our ability to pay. It's our ability to pay for infrastructure, our ability to pay for healthcare, education, a lot of the other stuff that's really important to us, an effective military. Right? It gets down to our level of productivity. And right now our taxes, you know, aren't being used to truly drive elements of importance within society. Right? We can be a lot better than this. But if we're more productive as a nation, we afford ourselves the opportunity to start to fund these priorities a little more effectively. There's other elements out there like Australia. They do a really good job. They've increased their competitiveness when it comes to productivity over the last 25 years. And if you look at demographics, the layout of the country, geography, everything else, Australia is very much like Canada. They are increasing and climbing the ranks of productivity while Canada is down near the bottom. This is going to take a creative and innovative solution. It's going to take a cultural shift, but it's the type of thing, again, it's a problem that we can solve together. Now you're hearing that and you're saying, okay, Barry, so what? Right? Productivity is interesting, but it's a little more abstract than maybe what you're paying attention to on a daily basis. Well, here it is. Here's what happens if we are taking a productive and efficient mindset, a creative and innovative mindset in approaching some of these problems. Imagine a world where service innovation was applied more broadly in healthcare, as Dr. Sina did at Mount Sinai in Toronto. Imagine the competitive business position of some of those private enterprises like banks and telecoms. If they said, you know what, we need to take a hard look at the way that we work and drive creativity and innovation there. Imagine a world where Canada and Ontario didn't have to team up to subsidize Volkswagen for $13 billion outside of the city of London. What else could we have done with that $13 billion applied more effectively? Imagine we didn't have to do that to draw these companies to Ontario. And imagine we weren't just a great place to live, but it was also an amazing place to work. Right? So, as I said, some broader based problems. This is the type of stuff, as I said, it can sound a little bit like doom and gloom, but it's not, I promise you. This is the type of thing I get very excited about because it's going to be people like you that drive solutions to these challenges, that drive whatever is next within these enterprises and organizations, and take advantage of the resources and mindsets and creativity around you and say, yeah, I can fix that. And I can fix that tomorrow. All right, so with that, I'll leave you with a quick quote. It's from a guy called Rupert Murdoch before he went to jail. And one of Murdoch's quotes that I like, it's not the big beating the small anymore. It's the fast beating the slow. So maybe we can all just pick up the pace a little bit. All right, so thank you. And we'll open things up to my friend Marianne and some Q&A. Oh, Marianne's run into a tech issue. Well, you can post them to the chat, Marianne. Oh, there we are.
Good now. Awesome. Well, thank you, Barry, for sharing and providing your insights. I don't see any questions just coming through just yet, but please feel free to engage Barry with anything that kind of comes to mind. Yeah. I've got a compliment, wonderful and thought-provoking presentation. So a really great start, Barry.
Like Peter had a question that came to him.
You might be having a hard time coming off mute as well, perhaps, Peter? Yes, I see you nodding. So whoever took me off mute, if you could also take Peter off mute, that would be great.
Hey, thanks very much. And Barry, fantastic presentation. I've got a couple of quick questions and comments, and I also do want to, there's one more slide after this that I do want to touch on in terms of wrap up, if we could advance the slide. So first of all, Barry, thanks very much. Very thought-provoking presentation. Just to reiterate a couple of the challenges and takeaways that I think you challenged us to think about. You challenged us to identify the macro level and fixable challenges in society and in our organizations. I mean, that is food for thought, definitely for all of us to be thinking about that, and challenging us also, I think, to aspire to be the best at something. And I personally believe that's a personal lesson as well as a lesson we can take to our society and to our organizations. You also mentioned kind of ongoing creation of value, and what I wanted to relate that to, and I'd be interested in your comments on it. I often get the question as MMIE director, why should I consider taking an innovation and entrepreneurship program as opposed to maybe taking an MBA? And the answer that I typically give, but I'd be really interested in your thoughts on this, is I kind of see the MBA still as a valuable degree. It's a necessary credential in a lot of industries to advance into the senior levels of management. It adds that additional level of kind of training and thought to the decision making for somebody who's leading an organization. And I think an MBA degree is also really good at preparing us to maintain the value of organizations. But I've always seen MMIE as also this idea that instead of maintaining value, we're training our students to create new value in organizations. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And I've been teaching in MMIE since the program was founded. I'm going back probably 10 years now. And it was founded among another larger suite of programs that we've got that are far more specific. Our Masters of Finance, our Masters of Analytics, our Masters of Innovation and Entrepreneurship in this case. MBA programs, I believe there will always be a foundational need for that, because this is, call it, that broad-based business education and background, that experiential kind of, give me the tools that I need to lead and effectively grow and grow my enterprise, whatever that enterprise is. But there are far more individuals we're finding now who are interested in particular areas of expertise. So you're going to get some of that business background, but we're going to do a deep dive. And these are people that we're generally calling T-shaped now. And some of you have heard that language before, where I've got, some broad experience in different areas, but I do a deep dive here. And in this case, what we're giving you is that set of creative tools. Regardless of the type of innovation you want to be leading, you've got a startup in mind, you've got a really cool idea for a problem that you're solving, and I want to launch that organization. We talk about that. Other people want to drive and fix problems inside of existing organizations. We've got tools and skills, but this is, call it, that deep dive into a particular area of focus of an organization. Society's proven to us that there is a need for that. Call it that deep dive, or those more specific masters in business programs like this.
Absolutely. I've got a question from a participant as well, but just before I move on to that question, just for the audience as well, if you're interested in this topic, I think Barry's message that Canada has a productivity problem, Barry, you were quoted fairly extensively in an article back in just last October in the Globe and Mail about that issue. Was there a reaction to that article when it came out, which had the very stark title, Canada has a productivity problem?
Yeah, and this is something I've been focusing on now for a couple of years, Peter. It's and there's some stuff out there that just makes you grit your teeth a little bit. I appreciate for the people around some of these battery plants that are being built, down in Windsor and London, Ontario, even here near Kingston. It's good for jobs. It's good for particular organizations and very specific, but it's a type of thing that, what bothers me about that is we shouldn't have to be funding them. If there's a true competitive skill set that we're good at as an organization, or in this case, as a province or a country, if we've got particular skills that Canadians can be best at, that should draw that investment. There are different parts of the world, places like Singapore, that have a bestness. The phrase I use is bestness in healthcare. They're truly amazing at it. You go to other parts of the world, Eastern Europe is really good at kind of tool and die and some of that engineering capability. And people who want that particular product or service, wherever they are, they're willing to travel or to buy that expertise or to invest or to, do research with those particular bodies, right? That's the type of thing that same creative spirit can help us with. It has a solution for us within productivity as well.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So question from a participant, for the quote, for the business model life cycle, what happens if the company has another product started, before the current product gets to the plateau phase in such a way that merges those two or more products together in an attempt to slow down the rate of decline of the original product. So I think as one product's coming to maturity, is there I think the question relates to then that idea of merging in a second product capability to kind of slow the decline.
Yeah. I can do that, certainly. And some organizations have become, quite adept at pulling products and features, from different services or products that they're launching and developing. But what you're describing is, where I've got this next curve started and I want to take some features from this new entity up here. I don't know that I would call that second product or service so much a business model lifecycle until it's actually established. But what you're highlighting is to me, it's a fairly healthy development cycle. It's a fairly healthy development lab or innovation culture you've got, where we continue to build new features and new services and, call it enhancing that user experience for whatever it is that helps us move up our existing business model. That is still innovation to me. That's more of an incremental innovation. It helps make what we're doing now even better. And you've seen that happen in spades really over the last 100 years with the automotive business model lifecycle. That model's transitioning, but we've added things. You can talk about anti-lock brakes. You can talk about nice sound systems, crash cages, airbags, all of that type of stuff. Remote start on cold mornings like we had this morning. These are all innovations that are helping to prop up and continue that existing business model lifecycle. You got to respect that. That's still good work to me within that organization.
Excellent. A couple other questions rolling in that I just saw, just to save Marianne having to come off mute, but Marianne's obviously helping us moderate these questions as well. Next question is, when discussing the development of innovation in different countries, what is the biggest challenge that Canada faces?
As I said, we've got a wonderful place to live. It's a great, diverse, spread out country. But that geography is probably one of the larger challenges we face, where you've got, that population band along the border and along parts of the major highways and river systems we've got in the country. Those pockets of expertise sometimes are just a little bit spread out. So we don't do a good job, I think, as a country, concentrating resources in particular pockets of expertise. We really need to acknowledge that I can't have an R&D center in Halifax focusing on the same stuff that one in Saskatoon is focusing on. I need to acknowledge that these people here are going to be, focused in a particular area, and then I want to start to concentrate my expertise in another field somewhere else. And recognizing, one of the most important responsibilities to me of leadership in any organization, including the public sector, is the allocation of scarce resources. And for us to be better at this kind of stuff, we've got to have a little more guidance and influence on where those pockets of expertise develop. It doesn't mean we don't do something in Saskatoon and Regina, but I want to have them concentrated so that we can start to become world-class a little more efficiently.
Yeah, and what was interesting was, if you think about that, you were talking about the kind of the geographic dispersion, within Canada of this incredibly, wide country that takes 6 hours to fly across. That was actually a basis of innovation in the 50s and 60s. That's where we got really good at telecommunication, right? We spawned Northern Telecom and Nortel, which, at the time was a hugely innovative enterprise. It spawned innovation in aviation. And we had, some of the most sophisticated business aircraft ever produced have been produced by companies affiliated with Canada. So I think there, as you said in your webinar, I think there's always opportunities there. I've got a couple of other questions for you, if you'd indulge us for a few more minutes, Barry.
Absolutely.
Next one is, how do we balance innovation and an organization's need for constant ROI or proof of value add of those innovative products and services? I think the question relates to that kind of that longer term pressure of innovation takes time, yet you're under constant, relatively short term ROI pressure of those innovations proving out.
Yeah, sure. And then once again, thanks to people like Kathy and Neha, for the questions and engaging with us here today. That's an ongoing challenge. And for a lot of organizations who are even publicly reporting, you've got that quarterly investors call, and the oversight associated with stock markets and everything else. And okay, we've got to be driving up profitability and reporting good numbers. Otherwise, we run into some real issues. So you've got that executive pressure that results from that. I get that. So for those organizations, you absolutely have to have one foot firmly planted in today, in creating value for today's customers, regardless of whether you're publicly reporting or some of those other more privately run organizations in the public sector. You've got to be finding a way to create value and doing the best job you can do today. All of those pressures I talked about earlier, one of the common themes that comes out of that is there is absolutely no room anymore in today's world for mediocrity. We have to be doing a good job in whatever space that we've carved out. Now, having said that, while I've got one foot firmly planted in today, I've got to have that other foot kind of out there thinking about what's next. Because sometimes, in those examples I talked about, we don't control when that next external influence, those environmental disturbances are going to happen. It may happen to us. It may happen to our sector. And if I'm not starting to think about what that next curve looks like and investing in some of those ideas and processes and, improving the level of service I've got, we're going to be left standing cold. So this is an ongoing responsibility and that dual purpose hat that we as leadership have to wear inside of our organizations.
Yeah, and I got one more question for a participant that I think we're probably gonna wrap it up, and that is question is, as an innovator, brackets, if we can call ourselves that, what is more important, the innovation or the proceeds from it?
I want both of you. And you can certainly call yourselves an innovator. More broadly, we refer to this as kind of the creative set out there. And you're looking at an old guy like me, and what's a guy like Barry doing leading an innovation, session? You're expecting the individual in their jeans and a mock turtleneck. I get that, but yeah, you refer to yourselves as the creatives or the innovatives. I want you as a problem solver in my organization, but where you create value is the impact or the output. So it's a matter of saying, how can I make life better? How do I improve the way that we work? How do we enhance and put more smiles on customers and patients and students' faces as we start to increase our broader level impact across society? But I want both. And as an organization now, as leadership, just quickly on this, Peter, as an executive, I've got a responsibility to enable people like you. I want to, again, solve today's problems for today's customers, but I want to make sure that at least part of your time, you've got to be thinking about some of those broader challenges we're facing and helping me understand how to solve those.
Yeah, just like Google allocates 20% of employees' time thinking about innovation, not just the operational side. And some work I did a couple of years ago with Bill All at the MIT Entrepreneurship Center, same thing. He calls innovators the crazies. And the trick is to firewall the crazies and let them go and run an innovation process that doesn't go and disrupt the core operations that, as you said, you got to have that one foot firmly in. You've got to deliver on the quarter, but you've got to have another part of the organization with very carefully orchestrated interactions between those two lines to be able to start driving the sources of future revenue, the sources of future markets, the source of future customers. And so I think to wind up on that theme, where I think what you've done for us today, Barry, is really stimulated and kind of lit a fire under me. I love innovation. And I think everybody on this webinar probably is feeling a little bit of a fire lit and saying, hey, where can we be innovating? Where can I be innovating personally? Where can I be innovating in my organization? And where can we be innovating nationally? Because that is, as you said, really a national imperative. And if I can ask our webinar host to bring up the last slide that's in the deck. On that note, what I'd like to tie this back to is, if this material has resonated with you, if you want to do a deep dive and work with people like Professor Barry Cross, like myself, I teach one of the courses in the MMIE program as well, and you want to meet a whole bunch of like-minded people who are focused on innovation, who are focused on entrepreneurship. They aspire to be entrepreneurs. They either come into a program like MMIE with an idea. You don't have to come into the program with an idea. Sometimes you find your founders and find your team in the program. That's a great reason to join this type of program. Sometimes you don't want to quit your job in a big corporation, but you want to move from the operating side to the crazy innovation side. and you want to become a corporate innovator or an entrepreneur, that's also a great reason to undertake some additional deep dive graduate study in this area. And we also get a lot of people coming into our programs who are saying, you know what, I want my career to go in a different trajectory. I want to do a trajectory reset. I don't quite know what it is, but I want to take some time to be able to do it. And some of our students have had great outcomes in that area. So just a message to the participants. First of all, thank you very much, Barry. We really appreciate your insight today. Anybody on the call who really wants to take this to the next level, go into our website, ssb.ca/MMIE. You can read more about our program or any of our professional programs here in the Smith School of Business. And also reach out to us. Start the dialogue. Start talking to us about what your ideas, your dreams are, your aspirations are, and see if we have a role in helping that come true in the future. On that note, thanks very much, everybody, and have a great afternoon.